As people grab a snack and trickle in and out, I thought I would begin. My name is Luis Suarez, and no, I am not related to the soccer player. No, I do not bite. I'm also not related to the mayor, who you are really here to see later on. I do have the honor and the privilege of being Steve Zack's partner, and I also have, before we begin, to give them a little bit of bad news. Dr. Padron, Mr. Zack, Dr. Portes, Dr. Grenier, I've got to tell you, you don't win the Who Got Here First contest. Not even close. That honor goes to my mother. And so I am going to claim victory on her behalf. She was the second plane out of Cuba on January 1st, 1959, and that is a story that I'll tell you down the road because we're not here to talk, at least in this session, about Cuba. I am going to let each and every one of the panelists that we've assembled to talk about education introduce themselves, and Mr. Zack once told me that when you get the Nobel Peace Prize, you get 2 minutes to talk. So using that as a benchmark for how long the introductions should be, by the way, I've never checked if that's true or not, but in any event, I yield the floor first to Mr. Harvey, then Dr. Moreno, then Chief Judge Soto, and then Dean White. So please introduce yourselves.
Good morning. My name is Walter Harvey. I'm a general counsel, school board attorney here in Miami-Dade County. Miami-Dade County Public Schools. Miami-Dade County Public Schools is the fourth largest school district in the country. We have approximately 350,000 students, about a $5 billion budget. We have a very obviously diverse student population. I think we'll get into that later. Myself, I was appointed school board attorney in 2009. I attended Harvard Law School. I graduated in 1995. I practiced at Steele, Hector & Davis, which was a firm here locally. I also was a partner at Gray Robinson, which is also a statewide firm, before I was appointed school board attorney. Being school board attorney, certainly it's a very interesting job, and I think for those of you here locally, I think you know it's been very interesting lately. But I'll leave it at that, and of course, if there are any more questions about my background, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
I'm Dario Moreno. I'm a professor of political science at FIU, and today, what I'm going to do is what I want to introduce is a kind of different perspective. I mean, my colleagues on the panel can talk about sort of education policy and how to improve it and what is needed for Latino. But I'll speak for someone who's been in the trenches for 30 years at a public university in Miami, where 60% of the university students are Hispanic. And in my classes, due to self-selection, maybe 90% are Hispanic. And the thing that I'm proudest in my career is not the time I was in administration, not the articles I published, but my students. The 30 years I've helped hundreds of lawyers, 1 congressman, 2 state senators, 5 state representatives, 3 vice presidents of major 500 corporations, and hundreds of political aides, consultants, bureaucrats, people who've gone into public service. And I think, and why a lot of them is their successes, I claim a little credit for that success in the term of mentoring and the importance of mentoring, especially Latino and African American students, especially students who are who are the first members of their families to go through college, who don't have parents, who don't have siblings, who have gone through that experience. So I make it a point. And, you know, and FIU, like every institution, is a very large institution, and we're about numbers. So I reach out, and I don't reach out to the best students because they'll take care of themselves. I don't reach out to the students who don't want to be there because they don't want to be there. But to hit the average student, or the little above average student, who needs some motivation, who needs some spark, who really doesn't know what a professor does, who doesn't know, you know, that we're paid for research, we're paid for service, we're not just paid for teaching, who need to understand sort of how a university works, who needs to know how to apply for law school, the importance of the LSAT, the importance of letters of recommendation, the importance to impress the dean of the University of Miami so they'll get accepted. And also to mentor students in terms of what law school is a good fit. Should they stay at FIU Law School? Should they go to the University of Miami? Should they try for one of the Ivies? Should they go to Florida State? Right? And also how to make it to a Judson Bowen, a Still Hector, a Gray Robinson. What do the large law firm expect in terms of class placement, credentials? One of the things, one of my lawyers is a partner at Judson Bowen. A friend of mine is the managing partner at Gray Robinson. And we go down to their offices and talk to them about how you have to perform in law school, why writing for law review is important, why really hitting the books your first year is really critical because it's the second year associate. How to impress the dean at the University of Miami was a good personal statement, right? And how things fit together. You know, and I also think very important is role models. I mean, one of the things that we did in the 70s and 80s is we allowed people like me into universities as professors, people with Latin last names, and into the major law firms. And, you know, one of the controversial things I did as a member of the FIU faculty is I brought Marco Rubio to be my co-teacher. Now, I didn't bring Marco Rubio because of his political views. I didn't bring Marco Rubio because he was a sitting U.S. Senator. I brought Marco Rubio because he grew up in West Miami. He came from a working class background, and he made it to the U.S. Senate. And that's a huge image for these students, that someone like them, who very much their background, can make it in this country into one of the great elite clubs. By the way, as I like to remind Senator Rubio, he's the poorest member of the U.S. Senate. And also, so what I ask all of you who represent the legal community in Miami, the most important thing you can do in terms of Latino education as an individual is role model, mentoring, and internships. I don't know how important it is interning. So that's sort of my perspective coming to this conference today.
Thank you, Doctor. Chief Judge Soto.
Good morning. I'm very honored to be here on this panel, and I was moved by the panel before. I grew up in a home where this was what we talked about 24/7. My father was a champion of bilingualism in Miami and diversity in the police department, in the universities, in the legal field, and we didn't talk about anything but this growing up at the table. So I wish I would have brought him in his wheelchair here. He would have enjoyed it. So I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. I am the chief judge of the 4th largest circuit in the country. Some say we're the third. We fight with Chicago all the time about that. We have 123 state judges. We have 11 courthouses. We cover from North Dade all the way down to Homestead and the Redlands. We have over 200,000 to 300,000 cases pending for those 123 judges. I think we do a great job. We have some great judges that you elect every 6 years here in Miami-Dade County. I went to the University of Miami Law School. It's all about the U. I am an adjunct professor at the University of Miami. I did go to FIU undergrad, and I was a political science major, so this is also up my alley. I'm again honored and proud to be here. It's all about opportunity. It's all about mentoring, and I hope we have a good discussion.
Thank you. And as a point of personal privilege, we've talked about Chief Judge Soto's father. We haven't talked about her daughter, who is also a lawyer, and it's her birthday today. And thank you for being here on your daughter's birthday. We appreciate that. Dean White.
Just before I introduce myself, and Chief Judge Soto's daughter is also an alumna of the University of Miami Law School. I'm Trish White. I am a professor of law and the dean of the University of Miami School of Law. I was, before I came here 9.5 years ago, I was for 10 years professor of law and dean at Arizona State University Law School. And perhaps it will come up a little bit later, how very different a university like Arizona State is from a university like the University of Miami, and how very different the student bodies are, particularly what we used to call the Latino student body in Miami and in Arizona, and what I was instructed when I came here, our Hispanic student body.
Okay, so the goals for this particular panel are essentially twofold. One is to get a current sort of baseline level of the state of education in Miami from each of their vantage points, and we have a person from the fourth largest school district, a person who interacts with the university, a person who interacts with the court system, particularly who has access to the community, particularly in the children's court, and a person who sees it from the perches of a law school. So, but using that as a baseline, Dean White, I'd like to start with you. So you spent 10 years in Arizona, particularly in Phoenix, which has a very large Hispanic community, and then you transitioned to Miami, which has a large and different Hispanic community. So from your perspective and from that perch, how would you describe the state of the Miami community and how it differs from Phoenix?
Well, let me say, first of all, about Phoenix. The large Latino population in Phoenix is, as my friend and colleague Alex Portis said, largely Mexican and Central American. It is largely a population who are at the bottom end of the economic specter, who came here for better opportunities. Many of them are undocumented. Many of them, of course, work in agriculture and work in gardening activities and send money back to their homes. Obviously, we all know about the inhospitable conditions of Arizona toward particularly undocumented Mexicans, and that pervades attitudes towards a lot of things, particularly bilingualism. There are movements in the public schools not to allow Spanish to be spoken. And so young people come in often who really don't really speak English very well, and they are deeply discriminated against because even when the teachers want to speak Spanish, the teachers sometimes get punished, and there's legislation often about this. So it's a very inhospitable circumstance, and those few, relatively few, first-generation Latinos who had risen to places with university or postgraduate education and roles of leadership, say, in the legal community, stood out as being remarkable people, which of course they were, but also as being deeply unusual people. And so at a school like mine, Arizona State University, which is deeply committed, as is FIU, and as we heard, it's much more analogous to FIU as being a state university that is welcoming of all people and provides opportunities. And as I think the greatest school in the country for this is MDC, and I'm sorry that Dr. Padron isn't here, but I thought what he said today was absolutely spot on and very moving. We had a lot of that at Arizona State throughout the school. We also had a very important junior college system, community college system in Maricopa County. And so a huge number of my students there were students who were first generation, often undocumented. We didn't charge a lot for tuition, and so I think of these students as inspirational, but also strivers. The first thing I noticed when I came here was that this was such an enormously different community, just again, as Alex was talking about, because it went up and down the entire socioeconomic scale for the kinds of historical reasons that were spoken about today. But you have the wealthiest people in this community, the best educated people in this community, the most politically powerful and respected people in this community very often are people who are Hispanic. And we also have, of course, large portions of this community who are much more like the profile of the students and the people that we have in Arizona. But what we didn't have there is this whole spectrum. And so when I came here, I just rejoiced in the fact that Spanish was all around me. I don't speak Spanish. My son is fluent, but I don't speak Spanish, and I'm embarrassed that I don't speak Spanish. That is a fault of mine. All of my colleagues, all of the people that work at the law school, all of the people who live in my building, they're bilingual, trilingual, quadrilingual. And I just regard that as something to be celebrated. And it was such a relief to come to a place like this where that is celebrated, where the diversity is celebrated from what is happening or what has happened and is continuing to happen in the state of Arizona. And so this university, the University of Miami, doesn't play the same role that FIU plays or that MDC plays in the educational, let's just call it spectrum of Miami. We tend to have, because we're very expensive, we tend to have students of the Hispanic background who are from families that have education and wealth. Now, I was just talking yesterday to my dean of admissions in the law school, and I asked him what the current class of applicants that we've admitted for next year, and that's still an ongoing process, but it's very similar. A quarter of our applicants are Hispanic. Their entering statistics are slightly above our average entering statistics. We do not in any way change or look to changing those entering statistics, standardized test scores, undergraduate performance, in order to make sure that we have a substantial number of Hispanic students. And we cost $50,000 a year in tuition. We do give generous scholarships. They tend to be based not on need, but on merit because of a variety of different kinds of reasons. Well, that's a different population from a population who really has no money, no resources, no background. And so that's one difference. Second difference is we also attract and have a very large LLM program. And we attract maybe every year 150 foreign-trained lawyers, many of whom come from various Latin countries. And so what we do is take people who are trained in their country as lawyers, and they come to get an advanced degree in law, and then ultimately sometimes transfer into our JD program or go take the New York bar. And so that's taking an elite educated group from Latin America, South America, and giving them American legal training, which allows them to participate in the legal system. Those people are amazing, and it's a very important role that we play. Right now, we're getting a lot of Venezuelans. an awful lot of Venezuelans who are escaping Venezuela or leaving Venezuela for the kinds of reasons you can imagine, and who are trained as lawyers. We formerly, historically, had a lot of the Cuban population as they came, the educated Cubans who wanted to do that, and we've had now the other country that we're seeing a lot of right now is Colombia. Colombia has very good universities, and we have arrangements with about 6 of them, and we're getting a lot of Colombians to come and do international, to be trained. So that's our population, and it's very, very different. And to just comment on the sort of normative quality of this conversation, there's a lot to be learned from that difference. And I think it's really important in spreading education that we think positively about opportunities which are given to people who are moving up the ladder. And as we're talking about the growth of importance politically and in leadership and in nationality, and as Steve Zaks says, you know, the United States is Latin America increasingly so, or is Hispanics increasingly so, we want to give them the entire spectrum of educational opportunities as well. And so.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's go from the law school to our main school system. Mr. Harvey, by the way, Chief Judge Soto, you're the 4th largest court system in the country, and you are the 4th largest educational system in the country. Hopefully it'll be 3 and 3 next year. Mr. Harvey, every time I see you, my wife, who's an ESOL teacher, says, "Can you ask Mr. Harvey?" And I always say no. Okay. No. He doesn't need questions from you about what's going on in the library. So as general counsel of the 4th largest school district in the country, and one with an extraordinary large number of Hispanic students, can you describe what you have done? Well, let's do it in 2 parts. One, the current state of Hispanic students in Miami-Dade County, and second, what is being done to help foster Hispanic students through the pipeline and through the ranks?
Okay, thank you for that question. First of all, I did hand out some materials. I'm not sure if you have them, but the materials refer to obviously the programs for English language learners that we have in our school system. And in addition to that, we have a list at the back of the demographics for our school system. Again, we have about 350,000 students. More than 60% of those students are of Hispanic origin. And when I say Hispanic, you know, I cannot paint it with a broad brush. Our Hispanic population in our school system is very, very diverse. It, again, ranges from students who are first generation, some are second and third generation, some originate from Colombia, Venezuela, Cuba, recent arrivals. So it's a very diverse population, and as such, the educational approach certainly differs with regard to those students. It's something that certainly brings, I think, most of us, at least at the central office, a great pleasure in seeing students, many of whom enter our school system, and within a year, 2 years, they graduate with, in many cases, very, very high honors, and in other cases, there are lots of struggles. But to see the students progress from one point to another is certainly something that gives us great pleasure. I will say that we do get a high number of students that enter our school system that are not only not literate in Spanish or some other language, they're not literate in any language at all. So that means that we have to start from scratch and build their base in Spanish, and then build it up in English, and then get them to the point where they're proficient. So we have a number of challenges within our school system, but it's certainly something that we look forward to. You will see that you will go to certain pockets within our county, and you will see in Homestead, for example, you might see more migrant students that come from Central America or Mexico And again, there's intensive programs that we've established through our system to make sure that they are learning. Most of that data is tracked. I mean, their progress, their adequately yearly progress is tracked both by the state, and we also report that to the federal government. We look at their participation in our advanced programs, our magnet programs. That information is tracked. We also have to develop strategies to bring Hispanic students into parity if they're not in parity. I think overall, I think if you look at our district as a whole, it appears as if, as far as Hispanic students are concerned, we are matching the general population with the participation in higher education track programs like dual enrollment, magnet programs, et cetera. But when you break it down and you look at different pockets, there are some areas where there's some struggles, Homestead, for example, and other places. So we're consistently looking at that. We're trying to develop strategies to work on that. I just gave you some materials on our English language learner program because, again, the school district's required to track its data. But I think many of you who are in education know about the LULAC consent decree. There was a lawsuit that was filed, and I know Ms. Soto here, Judge Soto, she's very modest about the accomplishments of her father, but I don't think there's very few people who've had such an impact on the area of education for Hispanics than her father, and I just want to make sure I mention that. And so this lawsuit was filed. There was the consent decree was entered into by the state of Florida, and it requires certain things to be done when students enter our school system. They have to be essentially assessed. They're given what we call a CELA test, and they're assessed in terms of their English proficiency. And based on that test, they're placed, and they may be placed into our English learner programs, which helps them basically acquire the English language. And through that process, we track it. And I think the goal is to have them exit the program within 3 years, and that's typical of what we try to accomplish. And I think generally we do accomplish that, but there are some areas of struggle. I think with regard to graduation rates, I think as far as the Hispanic students are concerned, we are on parity, but there still, again, are struggles in certain pockets and certain areas. And so we recognize those challenges and we develop strategies. Now, I would say every so often when Latin America catches, gets sick, we catch a little cold or sneeze, and we may get an influx, for example, of Venezuelan students, so we may get an influx of Colombian students, we may get an influx of, in some cases, we had students from Haiti after the Haitian earthquake. And so essentially we develop strategies to deal with the influx. I think even Puerto Rico recently. And so we in some cases where there's a large influx, of course, then it's typical that the students will go to a specific area. Like, for example, with Venezuela, it would be obviously Doral. And essentially, we want to target that area and make sure that we have ESOL teachers and others that can help these students acquire the necessary skills they need in order to advance through the system. And in many cases, some of the students who arrive, not necessarily from Venezuela, but from, let's say, Honduras and other places, they may also be considered homeless, and they may fit under the definition that's for McKinley-Vento Act for being homeless students as well. So you've got issues of transportation and getting them to the school and making sure they get fed and so forth. And so there's a number of issues, and it becomes very complicated. So when we talk about educating Hispanic students, it's obviously, we do it on a broader scale, a larger scale, and so we have to develop programs, we need money and resources, we have to pay our teachers and make sure that, they're adequately compensated. We, of course, pay teachers who are certified to teach Spanish greater supplements so that, of course, we can attract them to get their certifications, because it's extremely important to have certified teachers who can instruct in the language and help students acquire the necessary skills to graduate. So I think that's generally what we do. I think on a personal level, we have a number of attorneys within our office who are Hispanic. They went through the school system. Some are Cuban American, some are Colombian American, one is Venezuelan American. It's a very diverse group, but it's interesting. You see, when you look at the school system and then you see the product, you realize there are certain things that we should have in place, like obviously administrators and teachers who can mentor these students and see them through the process. And I think that that's something that we try to achieve. When administrators are placed in positions, I think the superintendent and the school board try to make sure that they're the right mix to make sure that these students progress. Another thing I should mention to you is we do have advisory programs and advisory groups within the school system. One is the Diversity, Equity, and Access Committee. It was formed, and its predecessor was formed back in the 1970s when there was an order to desegregate schools. And as part of that, we monitored, we started to begin the process of monitoring not only the Hispanic students and African American students and others and their composition within the county and desegregation, but we also looked at the employment of personnel and where we were putting them in schools to make sure that we also get integration in that area. And so there has been an impact, and we do continue to monitor that internally as a school board. I think that's important. I think integration is a very important concept that's been certainly promoted by our board, but it's something that in our fabric we have to understand, and we have to continue to monitor it and make sure that we have the right mix. We look at the progress and the graduation rates of students to make sure that that mix is not compromised in any way. So anyway, I know I went a little longer than maybe you anticipated, but I just wanted to get that out. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them later. Thank you.
It's okay. I forgive you. I know you've been stressed. You almost had a new boss yesterday, according to the press, and you may not have made it. Thankfully, it all worked out. I'm going to go to Judge Soto, and then after that, I'm going to switch gears to the second broad topic that we wanted to talk about, which is sort of playing the game of being a futurist and trying to envision a world of where we're going, which is in part what we're thinking about. Now, Judge Soto, you are in a unique position. You're probably one of the few people that have witnessed an unprecedented growth of Hispanic judges, and probably in the entire country. At the same time, you are living in a world where you spend a large part of your time fighting for operating budget, and you spend an extraordinary amount of time talking about the state of our actual physical courthouse. Every time I hear you talk about those topics, you talk in a sense of why it's so important. And to me, and the message that I hear you send is one of education and respect and passing it forward to other generations. I'm going to open the floor for you to talk about those three topics. One, the unprecedented growth. Two, the operating budget. And three, the courthouse, and why it's so important to you and why it's so important to our community.
Wow, that's a tall order. Okay, so yes, when I ran for judge at the age of 32, you're going to count how old I am now, in 1996, I think there were 5 Hispanic judges. only one had been elected to office. We have a bifurcated system, so we can be appointed or elected. And we had been successful somewhat in the appointment process, but had not been successful at the election process. And I started at the state attorney's office. I worked with Janet Reno, and Kathy Fernandez-Rundle was her assistant chief. And I was looking at the makeup of the judges on the bench, and they did not look like me. They were white, older males, which is fine. They were brilliant, but they didn't look like me. And I had grown up in a home of championing diversity. I had worked with my father on the famous Botatong here in Miami-Dade County in the early 80s, where we registered the most Hispanic voters at any given time in the country. And I thought it was important that we look a little different and we mirror a little bit the community that we were serving. And so at 32, I ran for office, and you run countywide. And that was the first time former deceased and loved Judge Manny Crespo was elected. Peter Lopez was elected. There was about 5 of us that were of Cuban-American descent that were elected. And it was a big change. And why that's important, and I think what we're hearing, what I heard Dr. Padron, and Dr. Padron has been one of my mentors. I was lucky enough to know him growing up, is it's about opportunity. And so I think the other professor here was talking about don't mourn, congregate, or group. And I think the Cubans grouped and got political power first in order to move their message. And it gave opportunity, an opportunity that I think a lot of our young people take for granted for Hispanics was a lot of hard work. So now we need to continue giving that opportunity, and it has happened. We have 2 Colombian judges on the bench. We have a Puerto Rican judge on the bench. We have a lot of different faces. We have 2 now, 1 Jamaican, 1 Haitian. We don't have enough African Americans on the bench. We need we need more diversity on the bench, even though Miami-Dade County, compared to any other county in Florida, is incredibly diverse. But we're different here in Miami-Dade County. So we have over 50% of our bench is female. And believe it or not, I am the first female chief judge in Miami-Dade County. We've had men, so and the first Hispanic, believe it or not, even though we're 60% of the population. But I sit in my conference room, and we're not allowed to put our chief judge photo until we finish our term. And everyone's a man, and everyone's white. And, well, Judge Farina and Judge Brown did not have white hair, but it's very interesting, even age-wise, how things have changed. We have a very young bench. So it's absolutely important that when you talk about the future, and I think going ahead is giving opportunity and mentoring people to come and be part of leadership. I grew up, again, in a home where that was what we were taught. And, you know, I had Dr. Padron, and I had Steve Zack, and I had all these incredible mentors that told me that I could be anything I wanted to be in this country. As corny as that sounds, I believed it, and I consider myself a daughter of that movement. And, you know, I can't thank them enough. And so it's my mission as chief judge and as a judge and as a leader in this community to mentor students. And I mentor my students at the University of Miami. I've tried to teach at a mock trial team in high school. I go to the schools as much as possible when invited to the public school system, because the kids are our future. You guys are our future. I'm hoping you're listening and you decide to be something and give opportunity. And I want people to know that people like us, people that look like me, can be there. I'm the daughter of an immigrant who came with nothing, and who taught in Iowa and in Virginia, and was in Wyoming at an Indian reservation, and taught at Iowa State and was a professor. All those things this country gave us. So the government, I'm the third branch of government, and judges, it's important because I think so many of the people that come to this country as an immigrant look to the justice system. What is different about the United States? I really think a lot of it has to do with our leadership in the legal community and the rights that we so care about and uphold. And at this moment, more than ever, we need to strengthen the judiciary and the people coming into it to make sure that that last bastion of fairness and diversity still upholds in our judiciary. So I encourage all of you that are thinking of a future career, don't listen to those naysayers about being a lawyer. They think it's an honorable profession and you can do so much for your community. As to our budget, even though I am a part of the Cuban American leadership, it's tough at the county to get money for the judiciary. It's tough to go to the state and ask for money because even though the economy is going up, it's been very difficult. We have a $40 million budget, and we deal with it through the state and through the county. Our facilities are run by the county, but our salaries and our programming is run through the state. So also having opportunity at that level, being able to be respected at that level. When I was appointed in 2002 as a circuit court judge, I had been a county court judge for 5 years. My first circuit court conference, and I'm being taped, so I'm not going to say who, I sat at a table, or put my plate down to sit at a table, and they were talking about their farms. And one gentleman said, you know, I have a 500-acre farm. And the other one said, well, how do you take care of a 800-acre farm? And he said, well, I own a bunch of Mexicans. And this is in 2002. And my godmother happens to be Mexican. So I took my plate and I said, I cannot believe I'm sitting with circuit court judges in Florida, and you're saying that. And I took my plate and walked somewhere else. But we're very fortunate in Miami-Dade County because people look like us. But step out of Miami-Dade County, and that's not necessarily true. And we should never take that for granted, and we should always encourage opportunity, not just for people that look like us, but for everybody. With reference to the courthouse, thank you so much. We have 11 courthouses, but our main courthouse, which is fondly named Cielito Lindo, which is on 73 West Flagler, is full of mold, has certain floors that are closed, has a rat infestation that's being worked on. It also has a termite infestation. It also has flooding. It has more than 80% of its columns that are deteriorating, and we need to get out of there. And I think the commission and the mayor know that. And they're already on the page of agreeing that we need a courthouse, and now it's finding the funding. It's a $360 million courthouse. It's not a small tag to pay. We have been in front of the commission for the last 5 years. We will continue to be in front of the commission. There is an unsolicited proposal for a Flagler site and an RFQ, request for qualifications for a courthouse by the Children's Courthouse. I see the light. I believe that this community is committed to making the justice system a priority. And I'm hoping that that happens. And on April 10th is a big day. If you want to go to the commission and rally for a courthouse, come on and join me.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. Moreno, I'm going to give you the last question and the last word. And before I do so, I want to recognize somebody who works with Steve and I. David Garcia Pedrosa helped us tremendously on this conference, and I didn't want to sit down without recognizing his efforts. Dr. Moreno, and if you don't like the question, you can blame David. Wave your magic wand. Where do you see us in 25 years? Let's not go 50 years. Where do you see the Hispanic community in Miami in education in 25 years?
Well, I think Miami and, you know, and Alejandro's probably has a better crystal ball in me, but I see emerging in Miami a truly Hispanic community cross-fertilized by the different Hispanic people that make up this town. I think the difference between Cubans, Colombians, Ecuadorian, Peruvians, the different Hispanic groups is becoming merged into this kind of weird, you know, combinations of food and dance and music, and you have Cubans no longer just marrying Cubans, but increasingly marrying Colombians and Peruvians and people of other nationalities. Senator Rubio's wife is Colombian. I asked Senator Rubio if his children are going to be Cuban or Colombian, and he said they're going to be Colombian because of the mother. And then he said, no, they're going to be part of this Miami culture. He caught himself. But I think you're going to see that. I think Miami, because of the uniqueness that the dean highlighted of how different this is from Arizona in the terms of the talent of the Hispanic community, is going to be kind of a harbinger of what's going to happen in other cities. And I think one of the things, and I'm a political scientist, and I think everybody's talking about politics these days. I went on a trip to Europe on a river cruise, and I refused to say I was I taught at university. I didn't want to hear I didn't want to talk about Trump. But what I see happening is and this is the danger. I think what happens in cities is very different than what happens in suburbs, exurb, and in the rural areas. If you look at an electoral map of Florida, Donald Trump won Florida not because of Dade County or Palm Beach or Broward. They performed actually stronger for Donald Trump than they did for Obama in either 2008 or 2012. But he lost the vast suburbs of Tampa, that area in northern Florida, which is getting filled out. He lost the Space Coast. Romney and Obama basically tied the Space Coast. Trump won it by nearly 300,000 votes. So I think the challenge Miami is going to have in getting state funding, in getting recognized, is we're shifting in one direction, more liberal, more democratic, because of the demographics and because we're a city and we have the pathologies of cities, good and bad, and we have certain needs, and they contrast with what's going on in the rest of the state and the rest of the country. So I think that's our big challenge in the next 25 years, is how do we show ourselves as a model, not that strange place that's really not part of Florida, not really, where Latin America starts. We're part of the country. We're a future vision of the country, and we're not that different. And I think that's our challenge. Sorry if I rambled.
Okay, so I want to, we're going to a break now. I want to open it up to questions. Before we do so, I will just give you one reflection, which is anybody in this room grew up with the adage, lo que tienes en la cabeza nadie te lo puede quitar, which is very true. I prefer Louis L'Amour's version, which is the education. You can never get an education. It is a continuing process. I won't give my hand at French. So with that, I'd like to open up the floor with questions.
Quick question. 40 years ago, when the Cuban lawyers came to Miami,
Steve, the mic. Yeah.
40 years ago, when Cuban lawyers came to Miami and they weren't able to practice law, of course, there was a special program put in place. And a matter of fact, I think Osvaldo was part of that program. And the people who participated in that basically flew up to Gainesville for the weekend, for months at a time, and ultimately took the bar. And they became the core of the international legal practice in Miami. It really is what made it take off. I'm just wondering, when I hear about the Venezuelan lawyers, and I hear Colombian lawyers, and I hear about all these other lawyers who are leaving their countries because they have to, why there isn't a program that was authorized 40 years ago by the Supreme Court and by the Florida Bar, so we know it's possible. Why does something like that not exist today? And maybe I ask Dean White,
Well, there are two reasons. One is that we're regulated by the ABA and not by the state bar in important ways, and so that makes it very difficult. But we have shortcuts now, and so you can come to our school and other schools that have international LLMs for foreign-trained lawyers, and first of all, you get an entire year's credit if you did well, even a civil law country. And so you're already a year ahead. If you come to our school and you enroll in the LLM program, then you can avoid having to take the LSAT exam, which sort of requires a degree of English fluency, which suggests that non-native English speakers recently in this country typically don't score as highly. So you can avoid that, which means we don't have to count it in our statistics. And then you can, in a year and a half, manage to get your degree. Now, the second thing, the second part of that, which is interesting, so you can get your degree, your law degree, your JD degree rather quickly if you want. The question then is, where can you take the bar and become licensed? The state of Florida will let you get licensed if you have a JD degree. Other states, notably New York, but others as well, for example, Tennessee, will allow you just on the strength of your one-year LLM to go and take their bar. And so there are ways in which you can get in. Taking the bar is not easy, but you can come here, and that's a lot of what we're doing, because what we have here in South Florida is a lot of well-educated, foreign-trained lawyers, remembering that foreign training typically is an undergraduate degree, so it's not as though they've been to graduate school, and they are able to fast-track the bar. A lot of people have come here already to live, and they've come from Venezuela, for example, and they're living here, and they're still, because they did their college education in Venezuela, able to go in. One other thing that we do, which I think is unique, you can add an extra semester and spend that first semester doing intensive English with intensive legal research and being able then to go and then start taking the classes, and you get an introduction to American law during that period. So even those people who come and who don't have quite the fluency that it's going to take to do law school can get through fast. So it's not the same, and there's this thing about the Cuban population that came. They couldn't practice anywhere except in Florida, and they couldn't practice federal law. I mean, it was a kind of a cabined entry. It was a great thing. It really made a difference. But that's where we are now.
Okay, let's go first to Mr. Juan. I can't see your last name, sir, from here. Go ahead.
Good morning. It was a phenomenal conversation. I think we need to keep going in these kind of conversations, especially here in Miami. And my question is regarding the importance of the Spanish language here. We have discussed here a little bit about the prior panel, and in this one, it was very clear. So my question is, what happened with the kids who come here with a bilingual education or education in Spanish, but they come here and definitely the school system is oriented toward their development of the English tools, and sometimes it causes them to lose their mother tongue. So wouldn't it be a good idea to implement a bilingual education program mandatory in the school system that will provide them with the opportunity to consolidate the knowledge in Spanish, and at the same token would allow the non-Spanish speaker student to become fluent in a language that is now so necessary to get a good job in a place like Miami. So my question is, why is it not that the Miami school system is providing a mandatory bilingual education, as in many places in Canada, where it proved to be a very successful idea of integration and giving opportunity to all the students?
Mr. Harvey, do you want to field that, and after that we'll go to Dr. Portes? Okay.
Yes, I'll be brief. Now, I can say that that's actually a very good question. It's a question I think that, certainly our school board members and actually district staff have debated. I think that, and there's been a push by a lot of community groups because, and not just for, again, for Spanish speakers, but also for non-Spanish speakers to acquire a language to make them more marketable in the workforce. And I think that's something that they've began to establish a number of programs for that. You know, of course, I think the initiation of some of the programs began about three years ago, and I think the idea is to expand that. You know, of course, you know, there's you know, challenges with regard to resources and having teachers that can actually deliver you know, instruction, and that's another series of debates as well. But I think it's a great question. I think it's something that you know, and I'm just the attorney, so I want to make that clear. I don't set the policy, so but I think certainly it's something that we should. I think the school board believes that we need to pursue more of. You know, because again, the idea is not just you know, fluency, but fluency in written and oral, and that's the goal. In multiple languages. That should be the goal, and that is the goal. And, you know, of course, resources play into it, but I agree with you. I think that's a great question.
All right, I am terribly sorry. We've got to wrap it up. I don't want to do so without saying thank you to the panelists and giving them a round of applause. We have a 5 to 10 minute break, and then we're going to go to forum number 2 on the media. And after that, we have our keynote address. The mayor's coming.